Hi students, today we are going to learn about anatomical considerations of the autonomic nervous system. So this autonomic nervous system or ANS, it will be discussed in three parts. In the first part, we will learn about anatomical considerations, in which we will learn about the divisions of the autonomic nervous system and what is the difference between the somatic and autonomic nervous system, and what are the autonomic centers. And then we will come to the next part, that is physiological considerations, that is about autonomic neurotransmitters and receptors. Then in the third part we will learn about applied aspects, that is diseases due to dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system and autonomic drugs, autonomic failure and autonomic function tests. So now we will discuss about anatomical considerations of the autonomic nervous system. Our learning objects will be introduction, importance, general organization of the nervous system, divisions of the autonomic nervous system, differences between somatic and autonomic nervous system, general organization of the autonomic nervous system, neurons of the autonomic nervous system, physiological anatomy of sympathetic nervous system, physiological anatomy of parasympathetic nervous system, neurotransmitters, autonomic receptors, functions of autonomic nervous system. So in this we will learn about all these things. Now coming to introduction, what is meant by autos? This word is taken from a Greek language. Autos means self and nomos means control. Thus autonomic nervous system is an involuntary system. Okay, involuntary system, and it controls the vegetative functions. It is also called vegetative system. Okay, what is the importance of this system? It collects, interprets and guides and executes the plan. Okay, it collects, interprets, guides and executes the plan with the help of smooth muscles which are present in the viscera and cardiac muscles and secretory epithelium of the glandular tissue. So where it will act, the smooth muscles of the viscera, cardiac muscle and secretory epithelium of the glandular tissue. See here the general organization of the nervous system. So nervous system is divided into central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is composed of brain and spinal cord. And the brain, you have forebrain, midbrain and hindbrain. This forebrain is again is having telencephalon and diencephalon. From the telencephalon we have cerebral cortex, basal ganglia, hippocampus and amygdala. From diencephalon we have thalamus and hypothalamus. From the midbrain we have mesencephalon, and from that tectum and tegmentum will be developed. From the hindbrain we have metencephalon and myelencephalon. Pons and cerebellum will be formed from metencephalon and medulla is formed from myelencephalon. Whereas in the peripheral nervous system, we have autonomic nervous system and somatic nervous system. And in the autonomic, we have two more divisions. Those are sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. So this is the general organization of the nervous system. Now coming to the divisions of the autonomic nervous system, sympathetic divisions and the parasympathetic divisions. So this is the sympathetic division. This is the parasympathetic division. Okay. So what are the divisions? Cranial, cervical, thoracic, lumbar and sacral divisions. Okay. You will see one by one. What is the difference between central and peripheral nervous system? The central nervous system is the central processing unit of the nervous system of the body, whereas the peripheral nervous system is the connection line between the central nervous system and overall body parts. The CNS is composed of brain and spinal cord, whereas PNS is composed of somatic and autonomic nervous system. And the CNS is protected by skull and PNS is protected by vertebral column. Coming to the function, the CNS will store, comprehend and execute the information in our body, whereas the PNS is important for transmission of the information from and to the central nervous system from body parts. Damage of the CNS can lead to global damage, whereas the PNS damage, it will lead to localized damage. Now the differences between somatic and autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system definition, it is a part of peripheral nervous system that regulates the voluntary movements of the skeletal muscles. Whereas ANS is the second component of the peripheral nervous system that manages involuntary movements of the internal organs. The nature of the movements that regulate the somatic nervous system can be voluntarily manageable, whereas ANS is involuntary. The major components in the somatic are cranial nerves and spinal nerves, whereas in the ANS, the major components are sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Coming to the nature of the functions, here the somatic functions are less complex than the ANS. Here the ANS functions are more complex compared to the somatic nervous system. Neurotransmitters involved are the somatic will involve excitatory neurotransmitters. This ANS is having both excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmitters. The type of muscles act it on. The somatic will act on skeletal muscles. The autonomic will act on smooth muscles, cardiac muscles and on glands. Coming to the need of neurons to transmit the signals. The somatic will have only one efferent neuron. In the ANS, it should have two efferent neurons and ganglia to transmit a signal. That is, ganglia is present. Before the ganglia, it has preganglionic neuron, and after the ganglia, we have postganglionic neuron. Coming to the muscular movements, somatic will control mainly the skeletal muscle movements, whereas in the ANS, it controls the muscular movements, accounts for more muscular movements than the somatic nervous system. That is, it is acting through smooth muscles and act on the cardiac glands, smooth muscles and glands. It is the general arrangement of somatic parts of the nervous system compared with autonomic parts of the nervous system. So it is the somatic part of the nervous system. So from the skin, it is carrying the information through afferent fibers and entered into dorsal root ganglia. Then it enters through dorsal rami. Then it is synapsing with a interneuron or connector neuron. Then it is activating the efferent nerve fiber which is going to the muscle through anterior root. So this is the somatic nervous system. Here if you see, this preganglionic neuron is starting from the intermediolateral horn of the spinal cord and it is coming through anterior root. Here sympathetic neuron is showing. Then it is coming into the anterior root or ventral root. Then it enters into the ganglia. It enters into the ganglia. Then it may give rise to fibers. Okay. It may give rise to fibers here only, or it may cross the ganglia, or it may give branches in the paravertebral ganglia or prevertebral ganglia, any ganglia, sympathetic ganglia. Up to this the nerve fiber is myelinated. Okay, through up to this the that is myelinated, and after the ganglia the fibers are unmyelinated. The differences between sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system are: sympathetic nervous system is one of the main parts of the autonomic nervous system that controls the body's fight or flight responses. Whereas parasympathetic is one major part of the ANS that controls the rest and digest functions of the body. So sympathetic is for fight and flight, flight or flight. Parasympathetic is for rest and digest. The function is sympathetic system prepares the body for emergency situations, whereas the parasympathetic maintains and conserves the functions when the body is at rest. The importance is sympathetic is responsible for producing rapid and total mobilization to avoid danger. Here the parasympathetic will restore the organism to its normal position. The ganglia. The sympathetic ganglia occur on either side of the spinal cord as two lateral chains, whereas the parasympathetic ganglia occur individually in the tissues and organs. They are very nearer to the tissues and organs. Sometimes they are embedded in the tissues. The preganglionic fibers of the sympathetic nervous system arise from the thoracic and lumbar segments of the spinal cord, whereas here they will arise from the midbrain and sacral segment of the spinal cord. The outflow of sympathetic forms the thoracolumbar outflow, whereas parasympathetic will form the craniosacral outflow. The neurotransmitters which are involved in sympathetic are adrenaline or noradrenaline at their synapse. Here the postganglionic fibers of the parasympathetic nervous system secrete acetylcholine. So acetylcholine is the main neurotransmitter in the parasympathetic nervous system. So they are cholinergic fibers. Here sympathetic are adrenergic fibers. The preganglionic and postganglionic fibers, if you see the length, the preganglionic fibers are shorter and postganglionic fibers are longer. Here the preganglionic fibers are longer and postganglionic fibers are shorter. The overall effect is excitatory in the case of sympathetic nervous system. For example, if you stimulate the sympathetic nervous system of the heart rate will increase. Here the parasympathetic is inhibitory. For example, if you stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system of the heart, it will decrease the heart rate. General organization of autonomic nervous system. There are some areas in the cerebral hemisphere. They are limbic system, prefrontal cortex, hypothalamus and part of the thalamus. So these are the areas in the cerebral hemispheres which are concerned with autonomic nervous system. And there are some autonomic centers in the brainstem also. They are present in the reticular formation of the brainstem. What are they? These autonomic centers are gigantocellular nucleus, parvocellular nucleus and general visceral nuclei of the cranial nerves. These general visceral nuclei are again in the nucleus tractus solitarius. We have general visceral afferent nuclei, and in the Edinger-Westphal nucleus we have general visceral efferent nucleus, and also in the salivary nucleus we have general visceral efferent nucleus, and dorsal nucleus of vagus is also having general visceral efferent nuclei. So autonomic centers in the brainstem are present in the reticular formation in the form of gigantocellular nucleus and parvocellular nuclei, and in the form of general visceral nuclei of the cranial nerves. They are general visceral afferent nuclei present in the nucleus tractus solitarius, general visceral efferent nuclei present in the Edinger-Westphal, salivary and dorsal nucleus of vagus. Now coming to the autonomic centers in the spinal cord. These centers are located in the intermediolateral gray column of the spinal cord at two levels. That is, for sympathetic, in the thoracolumbar outflow from T1 to L3, and for the parasympathetic along with the cranial part we have S2 to S4, that is called craniosacral outflow. Now coming to the peripheral part of the autonomic nervous system. It is composed of all autonomic nerves and its ganglia. The autonomic fibers are intimately related to different cranial nerves and spinal nerves. So we have different autonomic areas. Autonomic areas are present in the cerebral hemispheres, and autonomic centers present in the brainstem. Okay, and autonomic centers present in the spinal cord. These are the central ones. And peripheral part consists of autonomic nerves and its ganglia. The neurons of the autonomic nervous system. See here, somatic efferent pathway. We have already seen this. Okay. So this is the sensory neuron. This is the motor neuron, which is innervating the target skeletal muscle. The axon here, the axon ends at synapse. That is, it is forming a junction at the level of the target muscle. That is neuromuscular junction. Here, autonomic efferent pathway. The axon does not necessarily end at a synapse. Okay, and they will form postganglionic varicosities like this. The axon is bulged and it is releasing the neurotransmitter here. So this is the intermediolateral horn. From this it is coming like this. Autonomic presynaptic or preganglionic neuron. The axon is myelinated and it will synapse in a ganglia. Then the efferent neuron will come as an unmyelinated neuron. So on the target effector, for example on the smooth muscle, like this, it will provide varicosities. Here there is accumulation of neurotransmitter in the vesicles. Upon stimulation, the neurotransmitter will be released like this. So see here, comparison of somatic and visceral reflexes. The afferent inputs to somatic and visceral reflexes are the same. Okay, afferent inputs are same, whereas the efferent branches are different. For the somatic reflexes, for instance, it involves a direct connection from the ventral horn of the spinal cord to the skeletal muscle. Visceral reflexes involve a projection from the central neuron to a ganglion, okay, intermediolateral horn to the ganglion, followed by a second projection from the ganglion to the target effector. Okay, so our autonomic nervous system collects the information about the changes which are taking place in the internal environment, that is in the internal viscera, and it interprets these changes and guides the actions and gets the plan executed with the help of smooth muscles of viscera, cardiac muscles and secretory epithelium of the glandular tissues. Okay, these are the effector organs of the autonomic nervous system. Okay, and it is responsible for activities like digestion, circulation, excretion, respiration and reproduction, as well as for the function of adrenal medulla, sweat glands, lacrimal glands and salivary glands. And it also controls the activity of smooth muscles is present in the iris, ciliary body and erectus pylorum. Okay. So up to this we have studied what is meant by autonomic nervous system, why it is important, what are the main divisions of the nervous system, and what are the divisions of the autonomic nervous system, mainly sympathetic, parasympathetic, and what is the difference between somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. And then we have seen the autonomic areas present in the cerebral hemisphere, brainstem, okay, then in the spinal cord, and what is the peripheral part of the autonomic nervous system. Okay, mainly we will discuss about the peripheral part of the autonomic nervous system. So these are the anatomical considerations of the autonomic nervous system. Okay, now coming to the physiological anatomy. So we will discuss about physiological anatomy of the sympathetic nervous system. So in anatomical considerations, we have seen all these things. And what is the physiological anatomy? So how that anatomy is related to our physiology. We have sympathetic preganglionic neurons, preganglionic neurons of the adrenal medulla, and sympathetic ganglia, paravertebral, perivertebral or collateral, peripheral or terminal ganglia. And from that we will get postganglionic sympathetic neurons and sympathetic afferent fibers. Okay, all these will come under physiological anatomy. You see sympathetic chain ganglia, they may be prevertebral, okay, paravertebral or terminal ganglia. See here, from the intermediate lateral horn, these fibers are emerging, preganglionic neurons, which are colored green. Okay, then they will enter into one of the ganglia. Then what happens? They may travel up or down, or they may synapse at the level of ganglia. Okay, so they may terminate in the ganglion at the level of their entrance by synapsing to other cell in the ganglia, or they may ascend up, okay, or may they descend down. Okay, they may travel through the sympathetic trunk and exit without synapsing. Okay, they may exit the trunk without any synapse via splanchnic nerve, and they may terminate in a prevertebral ganglia. Okay, so this is the figure. So what happens? The sympathetic preganglionic neurons, the cell bodies of the sympathetic preganglionic neurons, where they are located? They are located in the intermediolateral horn of the spinal cord from T1 to L2. The myelinated axons of these visceral motor neurons will leave from the spinal cord via the ventral root, and then they will pass via the white rami communicantes. This is white rami communicantes. Why it is white? Because it is composed of highly myelinated fibers. So it appears white. Then they will pass through white rami communicantes to the paravertebral ganglia of the sympathetic trunk. Okay. So from the ventral root, or from the ventral root, where it will go? It will go to white rami communicantes. Then they will come to the ganglia. These are paravertebral ganglia. So on adjacent side of the vertebral column, you have a chain of ganglia. They are paravertebral ganglia. Now they have entered into ganglia through white ramus communicantes. Then what happens? After reaching the sympathetic trunk, okay, sympathetic trunk or sympathetic ganglia. So this is sympathetic trunk, sympathetic ganglia. The preganglionic fibers will take three destinations. What are those three destinations? They may terminate in the particular ganglia, and they may give rise to postganglionic nerve fibers. Postganglionic nerve fibers are unmyelinated. Okay, unmyelinated. They will go like this. This red one are postganglionic neurons. These red ones are postganglionic neurons. They are unmyelinated. So if they give postganglionic neurons, so here only they will go through gray rami communicantes. So why it is gray? Because it is composed of unmyelinated neurons. Then the second fate is they may travel up or down, okay, in the sympathetic trunk, and they may terminate in the ganglia which is located at the higher level or a lower level. Same here also. Okay. Then the third destination may be they may travel the sympathetic trunk. Here you see without synapse, without any synapse, and they may terminate in the prevertebral ganglia. Okay. So this is about sympathetic preganglionic neurons. Now coming to the preganglionic fibers that innervate the adrenal medulla. Okay. These will travel the sympathetic trunk and exit the sympathetic trunk without any synapse. Okay. And they will exit through greater splanchnic nerve. They will exit through greater splanchnic nerve and they will end directly on the cells of the suprarenal medulla. Okay. These medullary cells may be regarded as modified sympathetic exciter cells that will secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine into the bloodstream. Okay. These secretory cells of the adrenal medulla are derived embryologically from nervous tissue and are analogous to postganglionic neurons. So there is difference in the adrenal medulla because here the third destination was taken by the sympathetic nerves. They will go to the adrenal medulla and the ganglia is present inside or just on the adrenal medulla and they will synapse there. And the medullary cells which are present there in the adrenal medulla, they are considered as modified sympathetic postganglionic nerve fibers. They will secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine into the bloodstream when excited. You see here these three conditions. The central neuron, not central nervous system. The central neuron means preganglionic nerve fiber. Synapses with the ganglion at the same level within the chain ganglia. Okay, same level. Then a central neuron synapses within a more superior or inferior ganglion in that chain. Okay. Then a central neuron projects through the white ramus, but it does not synapse in a chain ganglion. Instead, it continues. Okay, it continues through one of the splanchnic nerves. One of the splanchnic nerves to synapse within a prevertebral ganglia. Okay, it will go from para to prevertebral ganglia. Okay, so like this prevertebral ganglia. Okay. So when coming to the adrenal medulla, it is going up to the adrenal medulla. So this is the sympathetic division and projections of sympathetic division. You see here T1 to L2. Okay. So the sympathetic ganglia are three types. One is the paravertebral ganglia. Second one is the prevertebral or collateral ganglia. Third one is the peripheral or terminal ganglia. Okay, peripheral terminal ganglia we have seen in the adrenal medulla. The paravertebral ganglia is the ganglia which are arranged along the entire length of the two sympathetic trunks, right and left side of the vertebral column throughout its length. So on either side of the vertebral column throughout its length we have sympathetic trunk and sympathetic ganglia. Paravertebral ganglia of sympathetic trunk further divided into three ganglia. They are superior cervical ganglia, that is cervical ganglia, thoracic ganglia, okay, thoracic ganglia and lumbar ganglia. Okay, so here the cervical ganglia further divided into superior cervical ganglia, okay, middle cervical ganglia and inferior cervical ganglia. So they are three in number. Now coming to the thoracic ganglia, they are 11 to 12 in number, and lumbar ganglia they are 4 in number. So overall you have 22 to 23 ganglia in each trunk. Here you see the inferior cervical ganglion and the first thoracic ganglion. They are fused together and they will form a large stellate ganglion. Okay. And the two sympathetic trunks which are present on either side of the vertebral column, they will end by joining together at the last, and they will form a single ganglion, that is called ganglion impar. Okay, this is stellate ganglion, and here the ending of the sympathetic trunk we have ganglion impar. Now coming to the prevertebral or collateral ganglia. They are also three in number. They are celiac ganglion, okay, inferior mesenteric and a superior mesenteric ganglion. Now coming to the peripheral or terminal ganglia. They are located within or close to the structures which are innervated by them. They are present in the heart, bronchi, pancreas, urinary bladder. Okay, so it is about a sympathetic ganglia. So we have seen preganglionic sympathetic nerve fibers. Then we have come to ganglia, and now we have to see postganglionic sympathetic neurons. The sympathetic postganglionic neurons, they are located primarily in the ganglia on the sympathetic trunks, and some are located in the prevertebral ganglia and peripheral autonomic plexuses. So the axons which are arising from these ganglia, they are unmyelinated ganglia. Okay, the axons may pass through gray ramus communicantes. So these unmyelinated axons which are arising from these ganglia, they will enter into gray ramus communicantes, and they may re-enter the ventral root to reach the spinal nerve. Okay, they may enter the ventral root to reach the spinal nerve. The gray ramen communicant is why it is gray in color, because it is composed of unmyelinated nerve fibers. In the spinal nerve, the postganglionic fibers travel through its branches, and they will innervate the sweat glands, erector spinorum muscles of the skin, okay, in the region in which the spinal nerve is distributed. Okay, so these postganglionic sympathetic neurons, some will enter into gray ramus communicantes, and they will join the spinal nerve, and they will go along with the spinal nerve, and they will innervate the sweat glands and erector spinorum muscles of the skin, where the spinal nerve is also distributed. And the axons may reach the cranial nerve through a communicating branch and may be distributed through it, as in the case of spinal nerve. So some may go through spinal nerve, and some may reach the cranial nerves also. Okay, some may reach the cranial nerves also, and they will be distributed along with the branches of the cranial nerve. Okay, so these are the fates of the postganglionic sympathetic neurons. And the axons may pass into a vascular branch also, and they may be distributed to the branches of the vessel. And some fibers from these plexuses may pass to other structures in the neighborhood of the vessel. The axons of the postganglionic neurons, okay, these will travel through vascular branches and through autonomic plexuses to reach some viscera, example the heart. Okay, and they may stimulate the adjacent viscera also. For example, fibers for the gut travel through the plexuses surrounding the branches of the celiac artery, superior mesenteric artery, and inferior mesenteric artery. So our postganglionic nerve fibers, sympathetic nerve fibers, are having different fates. It may pass through gray rami communicantes, and they will reach the spinal nerve, and they will be distributed along with the spinal nerve branches, and they may go up to the cranial nerve position, and they may supply the area which is supplied by cranial nerve, and they may enter into a vascular branch like a celiac branch, celiac artery, superior or inferior mesenteric artery, and they will be distributed along these arteries. Okay, So this is the uh, postganglionic sympathetic neurons. While coming to sympathetic afferent fibers. The afferent fibers are myelinated fibers which travel from the viscera through the sympathetic ganglia without synapsing there. They will enter the spinal nerve via the white rami communicantis and reach their cell bodies in the posterior root ganglia of the corresponding spinal nerve. So, the afferent will come from the viscera, okay, and they will enter into the sympathetic ganglia, but they won't be synapsed there. Only one nerve fiber is present. Then they will enter into white rami communicantis and they will reach the DRG, dorsal root ganglion. Okay, there the cell body is present. Okay, the central axon. So this is the peripheral axon. The central axons then enter the spinal cord, and they may form the afferent component of the local reflex arc. Others may pass up to higher autonomic centers in the brain. We have discussed the adrenal gland exception. Synapse is present in the gland. This is adrenal cortex and adrenal medulla. Okay. Adrenal gland. Epinephrine, non-epinephrine released in the capillary. Sympathetic innervation. So what is the segmental level of preganglionic neurons? T1 and T2 will give in the area of head and neck. Okay, head and neck. And T3 and T4 to thoracic viscera. T5 to T9 to upper limb. T10 to L2 to lower limb. T6 to T12 to upper abdominal viscera. Okay. L1 to L2 to lower abdominal viscera. And T1 to T12 thoracic and abdominal viscera. So this is the segmental level of the preganglionic neurons. Okay. So postganglionic fibers will give the respected viscera. Now coming to the parasympathetic nervous system. What is the physiological anatomy of the parasympathetic nervous system? Here also we have preganglionic neurons, postganglionic neurons. Okay. So here you see we have craniosacral outflow. That is cranial parasympathetic outflow, which is midbrain or tectal outflow, and bulbar outflow. That is from superior salivary nucleus, lacrimal nucleus, inferior salivary nucleus, dorsal nucleus of vagus. And sacral, we have preganglionic and postganglionic fibers. And as usual, we have afferent fibers of the parasympathetic nervous system. Coming to the cranial outflow. In that we have midbrain or tectal outflow from the Edinger-Westphal nucleus. So this Edinger-Westphal nucleus lies in the where? In the midbrain. Okay, in the midbrain. And it is closely related to the oculomotor nucleus complex. So this Edinger-Westphal nucleus lies in the midbrain. The preganglionic fibers will arise from the Edinger-Westphal nucleus. Okay. It will pass through oculomotor nerve, that is cranial nerve 3, oculomotor nerve, and they will relay in the ciliary ganglion. And this ciliary ganglion is a peripheral parasympathetic ganglion. Okay, and the postganglionic nerve fibers will arise from the ciliary ganglion. Okay, they will be called as short ciliary nerves. Short ciliary nerves, and they will supply sphincter pupillae and ciliary muscle. Sphincter pupillae and ciliary muscles. This is the midbrain or tectal outflow. Now coming to the bulbar outflow. It is from 4 nuclei. Coming to the superior salivary nucleus. The preganglionic fibers arises from the superior salivary nucleus. and they will enter into cranial nerve 7. Okay, and they will relay in the submandibular ganglion. They will relay in the submandibular ganglion. Then the postganglionic fibers arises from submandibular ganglion and they will pass to the submandibular sublingual salivary glands. Then coming to the lacrimal nucleus. Okay, it sends preganglionic fibers to the pterygopalatine ganglion or sphenopalatine ganglion. Okay, through cranial nerve 7. Then postganglionic fibers from the pterygopalatine ganglion will innervate the lacrimal gland. Now coming to the inferior salivary nucleus. It sends preganglionic fibers through ninth cranial nerve, that is glossopharyngeal nerve. These fibers will relay in the otic ganglion and postganglionic fibers from the otic ganglion will supply parotid gland. Then coming to the dorsal nucleus or motor nucleus of the vagus. Okay, about 75% of all parasympathetic fibers arises from the dorsal nucleus of vagus. The preganglionic fibers, okay, they will traveling in the vagus nerve and in the ganglia which are closely related to the visceral organs. Okay, so the preganglionic fibers, they are traveling through the vagus nerve. They will end close to the visceral organs supplied by the vagus nerve, such as heart, lungs, bronchi, stomach, esophagus, small intestine, large intestine, up to the large intestine up to the 2/3 of the transverse colon. Postganglionic fibers arise in these ganglia and run a short course to supply smooth muscles and glands in these organs. So, postganglionic fibers are very short. So, this is the distribution. Okay. See here. This is a ciliary ganglion. They have shown ciliary ganglion. Okay. Then this is pterygopalatine ganglion. This is otic ganglion. So all these are supplied by vagus nerve. Here we will see some physiological considerations also. So before seeing into that, we will discuss about sacral parasympathetic outflow also. It is also having preganglionic and postganglionic nerve fibers. Okay. So the cell bodies of the preganglionic neurons. Okay, they are present in the intermediate lateral horn of the second, third, and fourth sacral segments of the spinal cord. That is S2, S3, and S4. The preganglionic fibers arise from ventral spinal root of the corresponding fibers. These axons leave the spinal nerves to form the pelvic splanchnic nerves, and they will end in the pelvic autonomic plexuses. The postganglionic fibers are located in the pelvic autonomic plexuses. They are close to the viscera. So their postganglionic axons are very short. Okay, and they will supply the rectum. Okay, sigmoid colon, descending colon, and left 1/3 of transverse colon. So from the left 1/3 of transverse colon, everything in the GIT is supplied by sacral parasympathetic outflow. Up to that, it is innervated by cranial parasympathetic outflow. So we have craniosacral outflow in the parasympathetic nervous system. And coming to the parasympathetic afferent fibers, here also the afferent fibers are myelinated. They will travel from the viscera and they will cell bodies are located in the dorsal root ganglia, that is sensory ganglia in the which is present in the dorsal root ganglia. Okay, so they will enter through posterior root up to that. The central that is the peripheral axon of this PNS. Then the central axons enter the central nervous system and take part in the formation of local reflex arc, or they may pass to higher centers of the autonomic nervous system. So the afferent component of autonomic nervous system is identical to the afferent component of somatic nerves and forms part of a general afferent segment of the entire nervous system. So our afferent component of somatic and autonomic nervous system are same. The efferent component is different for each and everything. Okay. Now coming to the neurotransmitters and autonomic receptors. So previously we have discussed about anatomical considerations and some physiological anatomy. Now we came to physiological considerations. Okay. So uh, I thought I should make separate video, but it is very small topic, so I included this also in this video. So what are the neurotransmitters and what are the receptors? See here, the somatic motor fibers, which is coming from the central nervous system. There is no ganglion in between, and they will innervate the skeletal muscles and they will release the acetylcholine as the neurotransmitter. Here the parasympathetic is releasing acetylcholine at the level of its a ganglia, that is the preganglionic nerve fibers will release acetylcholine and postganglionic fibers will also release acetylcholine. So they are releasing only acetylcholine as the neurotransmitter. They are cholinergic neurons. Now coming to the sympathetic, it may be different. Sympathetic adrenergic fibers. They will release acetylcholine at the ganglia and noradrenaline at the level of the effector muscle. That is noradrenergic or adrenergic sympathetic nerve fibers. So now coming to the second type, splanchnic. In the splanchnic region, what is happening? They will release acetylcholine in the ganglia. Okay, mainly this. What is this? This is adrenal medulla. So they will release acetylcholine in the adrenal medulla. Then from the adrenal medulla, 80% adrenaline and 20% noradrenaline will be released into the bloodstream. Now coming to the cholinergic sympathetic nervous system. They will release acetylcholine in the sympathetic ganglia and also in the effector muscle, like our parasympathetic nervous system. So we have 5 different types of nerve fibers. Somatic motor, which is releasing acetylcholine, parasympathetic releasing acetylcholine, and sympathetic cholinergic will release acetylcholine. Then where is the difference? Sympathetic adrenergic will release acetylcholine here and noradrenaline here. Sympathetic splanchnic, which is supplying adrenal medulla, it will release acetylcholine here, and because of this, it will release 80% adrenaline and 20% noradrenaline into the bloodstream. Now coming to the autonomic receptors. What are the autonomic receptors? First one is the cholinergic receptors. And in these cholinergic receptors, we have two subtypes, nicotinic and muscarinic receptors. Nicotinic and muscarinic receptors. The nicotinic receptors, they are central cholineceptors. The muscarinic receptors are also called peripheral cholineceptors. So what are the differences between these two? The nicotinic receptors, they are ion channel linked receptors. Ion channel linked receptors. Okay. Where the muscarinic receptors, they are GPCR, G protein coupled receptors. And here the autonomic ganglia. Okay. These nicotinic receptors, they are central cholineceptors. So they are present in the autonomic ganglia, both in the sympathetic ganglia and parasympathetic ganglia. Okay. So in the ganglia, we have again this is having subtypes, capital and small n types of receptors. Okay, and in the case of adrenal medulla, also you have n types of receptors. Whereas the skeletal muscle at the neuromuscular junction also is having nicotinic receptors. So it is not coming under autonomic, but The nicotinic receptors are also present in the NMJ. They are different. You observe this is NM type of receptors. Okay, and these are almost excitatory in nature. Okay, because they are cholinergic receptors. They are releasing acetylcholine. So where they are present? At the autonomic ganglia NN type, and in the adrenal medulla NN type, and the skeletal muscle M. Okay, so they are present in the both somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. Now coming to the muscarinic receptors, they are G protein coupled receptors, and they are present in the peripheral organs that receive postganglionic parasympathetic fibers. So on the peripheral organs, we have postganglionic parasympathetic fibers. There they are present. There are also many types, M1 to M5. Mainly M2 are present on the heart. They will cause inhibition of the heart. And M3 present on the exocrine glands. They will cause contraction of the exocrine glands. And they are present on the smooth muscles of the GIT, urinary tract and bronchial muscles. M3 type are present. They will also cause contraction of the smooth muscles. And they may be excitatory or inhibitory in nature. Okay. You can see M cholineceptors or muscarinic cholineceptors. They are 5 different types. M1 is excitatory, present in the central nervous system and gastric parietal cells. So they will cause excitation of the central nervous system, and they will cause secretion of the gastric acid. They are excitatory. M2 are inhibitory. They are present in the heart. So if you stimulate those things, will cause bradycardia. M3 are excitatory. They are present on the exocrine glands, smooth muscles and vascular endothelium. They will cause contraction of these muscles. So they will lead to secretion of the glands, smooth muscle contraction and vasodilatation of the vascular endothelium via nitric oxide mechanism. M4 and M5 present in the CNS. They are helpful for memory, arousal and attention. So these three are important. M1 in the CNS and gastric parietal cells, M2 heart, M3 in the exocrine glands, smooth muscles and vascular endothelium. Now we have seen one type of receptors. Okay, muscarinic receptors. Sorry, we have seen cholinergic receptors, which are of two types, nicotinic and muscarinic. So their acetylcholine is released. Now we came to adrenergic receptors. These are again these many types, alpha and beta. Alpha is again divided into alpha 1 and alpha 2. Beta is again divided into beta 1, beta 2 and beta 3. Where they are located? Adrenergic means they will release noradrenaline at the site of synapse. Alpha 1 located in the arterioles of the coronary, visceral and cutaneous circulation and present in the veins, internal sphincters and iris dilator muscle. Alpha 2 present in the presynaptic membrane, pancreas, veins, adipose tissue, GIT sphincters, salivary glands. Beta 1 is present in the heart, SA node, AV node, atrial muscle and ventricles. And also JG apparatus, juxtaglomerular apparatus of the kidney and adipose tissue. Beta 2 is present in arterioles, which are supplying the muscles, and veins and muscles of the bronchi, liver, pancreas, uterus, iris constrictor muscle. Beta 3 is present in the adipose tissue and urinary bladder. It is the distribution of the adrenergic receptors. Now coming to the last topic in this discussion, that is about the functions of the autonomic nervous system. So what are the functions of the autonomic nervous system? What is the functions of sympathetic nervous system and what are the functions of parasympathetic nervous system? So first we will come from top to bottom, that is from eyes. Okay. So eyes are having a dilated pupillae muscle, sphincter pupillae muscle and ciliary muscle. So The dilated pupillary muscle is not innervated by any parasympathetic nervous system. Only it has alpha 1 receptors of the sympathetic nervous system. So by stimulating alpha 1 receptors in the dilated pupillae will lead to contraction of the dilated pupillae that leads to mydriasis. Okay, mydriasis. Then sphincter pupillae muscle. It leads to, so sphincter pupillae muscle is having parasympathetic innervation. The stimulation of parasympathetic nervous system in the sphincter pupillae leads to contraction of the sphincter pupillae leading to meiosis. So exactly opposite mechanisms, mydriasis and here meiosis. Then in the ciliary muscle, it is also having parasympathetic innervation only. So upon stimulation, it causes contraction of the ciliary muscle. Okay. So it is helpful for accommodation for a near vision. It is responsible for giving accommodation for the near vision. So in the eye, you have three types of muscles which are innervated by ANS. First one is the dilator pupillae, which is receiving sympathetic. That is, it is having alpha 1 receptors causing mydriasis. And the remaining two, sphincter pupillae is having parasympathetic innervation. Upon activation, it leads to contraction, that is meiosis. And ciliary muscle is also having parasympathetic innervation. Upon stimulation, it contracts. So, it produces accommodation for the near vision. Then coming to the heart. The heart is having nodes and a muscular system. The SCA node is having, so all the parts of the heart is having both sympathetic and parasympathetic innervation. The SCA node, atria, AV node and conduction system, ventricles. If you stimulate the parasympathetic system of these nodes and conduction system and muscular or muscles, it leads to decrease in the activity. That is, if you stimulate SCA node, it leads to decrease in the heart rate and causes vagal arrest. And atria, if you stimulate this, leads to decrease in the contractility. And if you stimulate ventricles also, it leads to decrease in the contractility. And if you stimulate AV node, it leads to decrease in the conduction velocity. And what happens if you stimulate heart through sympathetic nervous system? So heart is having beta 1 receptors in all these things. And in addition, it is also having beta 2 receptors also except in the SCA node. So beta 1 receptors are present throughout the heart, and except in the SCA node, you have beta 2 receptors also in the heart. If you stimulate the heart through these receptors, it will lead to increase in the heart rate, increase in the contractility, increase in the conductivity, and increase in the velocity of conduction. Then coming to arterioles, that is in the circulatory system. Arterioles. So different, here you can see this. So different arterioles, that is it depends upon the organ which it supplies. They have different types of receptors for sympathetic nervous system, and mostly they doesn't have parasympathetic effect, but some have parasympathetic effect. So see, first coronary arterioles. Coronary means the arterioles which supply the heart. Coronary arterioles is having supply from the alpha 1, alpha 2 receptor and beta 2 receptor. So alpha 1, alpha 2 receptors upon stimulation causes constriction. If you stimulate coronary arteriole through beta 2, it will lead to dilatation of the arteriole. Okay. Then cutaneous and mucosal. Okay, cutaneous arterioles, that is supplying the skin and mucosa. It doesn't have parasympathetic supply, but they will have alpha 1, alpha 2 of a sympathetic nervous system. Upon stimulation, it causes constriction of these arterioles. Then coming to skeletal muscle. No supply of the parasympathetic nervous system. And here you have alpha 1 and beta 2. So alpha 1 will cause constriction of the arterioles in the skeletal muscle. Beta 2 will cause dilatation of the arterioles which are present in the skeletal muscle. Then coming to cerebral circulation. Cerebral, that is brain. Brain arterioles having parasympathetic system supply, that will dilate the cerebral arterioles, whereas sympathetic nervous system, it will cause constriction of the cerebral arteriole through alpha 1 receptors. Then coming to pulmonary, that is lung. Upon dilatation through parasympathetic, upon activation through parasympathetic leads to dilatation of the pulmonary arterioles. And these are having alpha 1 and beta 2 receptors. Alpha 1 will cause constriction and beta 2 will cause dilatation. Coming to the abdominal viscera. Abdominal viscera and renal, that is kidney. These two are not having parasympathetic innervation, but they are having alpha 1 and alpha 2 receptors of the sympathetic nervous system. They will lead to constriction. Coming to salivary glands. So parasympathetic will cause dilatation of the arterioles present in the salivary glands, and because of the alpha 1 and alpha 2, they will cause constriction of the salivary glands. And renal, in addition to alpha 1 alpha 2, it is also having beta 1 and beta 2 receptors, leads to dilatation of the arteriole present in the renal system. Now coming to the systemic veins, there is no supply of the parasympathetic nervous system, whereas alpha 1 and alpha 2 leads to constriction, beta 2 causes dilatation of the systemic veins. Okay. Then coming to the lungs. Okay. The bronchial muscles and bronchial glands are main parts in the lungs. The bronchial muscles having parasympathetic nervous system leads to contraction of the bronchial muscles, whereas here the sympathetic one is different. That is, beta 2 will cause relaxation, alpha 1 is causing inhibition, that is contraction. Coming to the bronchial glands, okay, upon stimulation they will cause secretion. Here sympathetic effect, beta 2 will cause stimulation. Salivary glands is having parasympathetic effect. Upon stimulation they will produce profuse watery secretion. And in alpha 1, if you stimulate through alpha 1 receptors, they will produce thick viscous secretion. So both are secretory only, but upon parasympathetic stimulation they will produce profuse watery secretion, and upon sympathetic stimulation they will secrete thick viscous secretion. And here in the bronchial glands, because of the sympathetic and parasympathetic, they are a stimulant only. Now coming to the stomach. The motility and tone increases. Okay, the motility and tone increases because of the parasympathetic effect. The motility and tone. And because of the sympathetic effect, alpha 1 and alpha 2 and beta 2 receptors, they will decrease the motility and tone of the stomach. The sphincters, they will relax because of the parasympathetic effect. And because of the alpha 1 receptors, the sphincters will contract upon sympathetic effect. Secretion stimulated because of parasympathetic nervous system, and because of alpha 2 receptors, the secretions are inhibited by sympathetic nervous system. And the remaining ones are not shown here. Okay. Upon gallbladder, the parasympathetic will cause contraction and sympathetic will cause relaxation through beta 2 receptors. Liver is not having parasympathetic innervation, but it is having sympathetic innervation and it is having beta 2 receptors, and they will cause relaxation. Sorry, beta 2 and alpha 1 receptors, they will cause glycogenolysis, breakdown of the glycogen. pancreas is having exocrine glands and endocrine glands. Exocrine glands is having parasympathetic innervation. Upon stimulation, they will secrete. And alpha 1 receptors are present in the sympathetic nervous system and they will inhibit the secretion. And the endocrine glands are having only sympathetic innervation. Alpha 2 receptors inhibit the insulin secretion. Beta 2 receptors will stimulate the glucagon secretion. Now coming to spleen. The capsule of the spleen is having only sympathetic stimulation, that is through alpha 1 it causes contraction, beta 2 causes relaxation of the splenic capsule. Adrenal medulla is having only parasympathetic effect, that is causing secretion of the epinephrine, norepinephrine into the circulation. Urinary bladder is having muscle, that is detrusor muscle, which contracts upon parasympathetic stimulation, and because of sympathetic stimulation it relaxes through beta 2 receptors. Sphincters, they will relax because of the parasympathetic innervation, and because of the presence of alpha 1 receptors in the sphincters, they will contract on sympathetic stimulation. Now coming to the uterus, there is a variable effect on the parasympathetic stimulation. And here also the sympathetic system on pregnant uterus, the expression of alpha 1 receptors are high, so they will cause contraction. And in the non-pregnant uterus, they will cause relaxation because of the exhibition of beta 2 receptors. Okay. In lacrimal glands, secretion occurs because of parasympathetic effect. And skin, we have pilomotor muscle and sweat glands. The pilomotor muscles contracted through alpha 1 receptors. And sweat glands, they will cause a sweating because of the alpha 1 receptors. And in the nasopharyngeal glands, they will secrete because of the parasympathetic effect. And the remaining all these things, adipose tissue, JG cells, pineal glands, skeletal muscles, okay, all these things doesn't have parasympathetic effect, and basal metabolic rate, mental activity are also not having parasympathetic effect, but they are having sympathetic effect. Okay, so on the adipose tissue, it causes lipolysis and release of free fatty acids through alpha 1, beta 1 and beta 3 receptors. And through beta 1 receptors on the JG cells, it causes increased renin secretion. And in the pineal gland, through beta 1 receptors, it causes increased melatonin secretion. And through beta 2 receptors in the skeletal muscles, it causes increased glycogenolysis. And the basal metabolic rate is increased through beta 2 receptors of the sympathetic nervous system. The mental activity is also increased because of the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so these are the functions of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Okay, so overall, what are the main differences between sympathetic and parasympathetic system? Based on the location, the sympathetic nervous system, the cell bodies where they are located, in the intermediolateral horns of the spinal cord, that is T1 to L3 or T1 to L2. Okay, spinal. So this is called thoracolumbar outflow. So the cell bodies of the preganglionic neurons are present in the intermediolateral horn of the spinal cord between T1 to L2 or T1 to L3. Whereas in the parasympathetic nervous system, the cell bodies of the preganglionic neurons are located in the cranial nuclei, that is cranial outflow, that is the nuclei associated with the cranial nerves 3, 7, 9 and 10. And they are also present in the intermediolateral horn of the S2, S3 and S4 spinal segments. So it is called craniosacral outflow. Now coming to the components and ganglia. In the sympathetic nervous system, the components are consolidated and the ganglia are linked up to form a chain. In the parasympathetic nervous system, the components are isolated and the ganglia remain isolated. Now coming to the preganglionic nerve fibers. They are short, myelinated and end in the paravertebral and or a prevertebral ganglia in case of sympathetic nervous system. And the preganglionic nerve fibers are long, myelinated and end on postganglionic neurons which are located on the viscera or near the viscera. Coming to the postganglionic fibers, they are long and non-myelinated in the sympathetic nervous system and the short and myelinated in the case of parasympathetic nervous system. They are very short. Neurotransmitters in the preganglionic fibers of sympathetic and parasympathetic will release cholinergic, that is acetylcholine, whereas postganglionic, the sympathetic will release mostly adrenergic and parasympathetic release acetylcholine, that is always cholinergic. So in sympathetic we have three types, no? It may release acetylcholine or it may release adrenaline. Okay, we have seen in this diagram. Okay, it may release acetylcholine or it may release adrenaline. Then the area of effect. The preganglionic fibers of the sympathetic nervous system will branch and enter the several ganglia, and they will transmit the nerve impulse to many postganglionic fibers. So sympathetic activity is spread over many segments because of the branching. The preganglionic fibers of the parasympathetic nervous system do not branch. Each enters a single ganglion and they will transfer the nerve impulses to a single postganglionic fiber. Therefore, parasympathetic activity is localized. That is, target is usually single organ or single system. Now coming to the functions. We have seen the functions. If you see the overall functions of the sympathetic nervous system, mass sympathetic discharge usually occurs in the threatening situation. That is, it prepares the individual to cope up with the emergency. It causes fight or flight reactions. So what is the fight or flight reaction? What are the characteristics of this? It is characterized by dilatation of the pupil, increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, constriction of the cutaneous arterioles, increased alertness and arousal, and increased blood glucose and free fatty acid levels. So it is mainly leading to catabolism. So it is also called catabolic nervous system. Now coming to the parasympathetic nervous system, the main function of the parasympathetic nervous system is to uh, yeah, is for digestion. So rest and digest. It is also called rest and digest system. Okay. So unlike sympathetic nervous system, the functions of parasympathetic nervous systems are discrete and each function is separately regulated. This system is concerned with vegetative aspect of day-to-day living. So what are some functions? It helps in digestion and absorption of food and increased activity of intestinal muscles and increased gastric acid secretion, and it causes pyloric relaxation, and it also leads to micturition, pupillary constriction and bradycardia. Since the parasympathetic nervous system decreases the rate of metabolism, it is also called anabolic nervous system. So it is also called anabolic nervous system. So this completes the main differences between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. So next, in the next video, we will discuss about the applied aspects of autonomic nervous system. In applied aspects, we will discuss the diseases or syndromes due to dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system and autonomic drugs, autonomic failure and autonomic function tests.